I'm Abigail, 29, and I still feel the weight of my wedding dress, the one I never wore down the aisle. Picture me in my bedroom, veil half-pinned sunlight catching my mother's pearl earrings when my phone buzzes. It's a text from my sister Harper with a fake pregnancy report claiming my fiancé James is the father. My heart stops. I've been quietly paying for Harper's college, our family's bills, her entire life. Why would she do this? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you'd give everything for? Stick with me to find out what I did next. Please subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. My phone felt like a brick in my hand, the screen still glowing with Harper's text. That fake pregnancy report stared back at me, the forged medical letterhead so convincing it made my stomach twist. I was still in my bedroom, the veil now crumpled on the dresser, my mother's pearl earrings abandoned beside it. I couldn't breathe properly, like the air had thickened. How could Harper do this? My little sister, the one I'd spent years shielding, the one I'd poured every spare dollar into. I kept seeing her at 10, her pigtails bouncing as she clung to me after Dad left, promising I'd always be there. Now this. I dialed James, my fingers fumbling. He was at his parents' place, probably ironing his suit for the rehearsal dinner. His voice came through warm at first, then sharp when I mentioned the report. "Abigail, that's impossible," he said, but there was a pause, a crack in his certainty that made my chest ache. I don't know what's going on, but I swear it's not true. I wanted to believe him, but that hesitation lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. I hung up, my mind spiraling. Was he hiding something? Or was Harper playing a cruel game? I grabbed my keys and drove to Harper's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tight, knuckles white. I kept thinking about all I'd given her. College tuition, rent, even the groceries she never thanked me for. I'd been working overtime at my accounting job, skipping vacations just to keep her afloat. And now this betrayal. The thought burned, but I pushed it down, telling myself there had to be an explanation. Harper's apartment was in a noisy college complex, the kind with bikes chained to railings and music spilling from open windows. I knocked, my heart thudding. She opened the door, her dark hair messy, a grin on her face as she laughed with friends sprawled on her couch. The sight of her so carefree while my world was crumbling hit like a slap. Textbooks I'd paid for were stacked on her coffee table next to a half-empty pizza box. "Abigail." "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice too light, like she hadn't just sent a bomb into my life. I held up my phone, the report still open. This. "Why did you send this to me?" My voice shook, but I kept it steady, not wanting her friends to see me unravel. Harper's grin faded, but only for a second. She shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Oh, that. You'll see why soon enough." Her nonchalance was a knife twisting deeper. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her friends were watching, and I felt exposed, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Harper, this isn't a game. You're saying James is the father of your kid. Do you know what that does to me?" She rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, and said, "Relax, it's not that serious." "Not that serious. My wedding was in 2 days, and my fiancé was questioning everything because of her." I wanted to grab her shoulders, shake her until she explained, but I just stood there, my breath shallow, feeling the ground slip beneath me. Tessa's car pulled up behind me, her headlights cutting through the dusk. She'd insisted on coming when I texted her, saying I looked like I'd seen a ghost. She stepped out, her curly hair bouncing, and took one look at my face. "Abigail, you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I shook my head, unable to speak. She glanced at Harper, then back at me. "Let's talk inside, away from her audience." But Harper just laughed, a sharp sound that echoed in my ears. "Go ahead, make a scene," she said, turning back to her friends. I followed Tessa to her car, my legs heavy. She leaned against the hood, her arms crossed. "You need to confront her properly, but not like this. She's playing you, Abigail." I nodded, but my mind was stuck on Harper's smirk, the way she dismissed me. Tessa's words made sense, but all I could feel was this growing unease, like I was losing something I couldn't name. Was it James Harper? Or the version of myself I'd built around saving everyone else? Tessa's words hung in the air as we sat in her car, the engine still ticking from the drive. My hands were clammy, twisting the hem of my sweater. Harper's casual dismissal burned in my chest, but I couldn't shake the image of her at 16 crying when I paid for her prom dress after Mom said we couldn't afford it. I'd worked double shifts that month eating instant noodles to make it happen. Now she was throwing it all back in my face. I glanced at Tessa, her eyes steady on me. "She's not sorry," I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. She looked at me like I was nothing. Tessa reached for my hand, squeezing it. "You're not nothing, Abigail. You've been carrying her for years. Maybe it's time to ask why." Her words hit hard, stirring a question I'd buried. Why did I keep giving when Harper never asked how I managed? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old texts from Harper. "Thanks for the rent money, sis. Can you send more for books?" Each message was a reminder of my sacrifices, but none held a hint of gratitude. I stopped on a photo from last summer, Harper and me at a lake, her arm around me, smiling like we were close. I'd paid for that trip too, thinking it would bring us together. Now it felt like a lie. Tessa drove us to a diner nearby, the kind with sticky booths and coffee that tasted like burnt toast. We slid into a corner table, the hum of late-night conversations around us. "You need to eat something," she said, pushing a menu my way. But my appetite was gone, replaced by a gnawing ache. I kept replaying Harper's words. "You'll see why soon enough." What did that even mean? Was she trying to hurt me? Or was there something deeper? The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Joyce, took our order. I managed to ask for a tea, my voice flat. Tessa ordered fries, then leaned in. "Have you talked to your mom yet? Margaret might know something." I shook my head. Mom always took Harper's side, calling her the sensitive one, while I was the strong one who could handle anything. It stung remembering her voice last Christmas praising Harper's art project, while barely noticing I'd paid the electric bill to keep the lights on. I called Mom from the diner, my hands shaking again. She picked up, her tone sharp. "Abigail, it's late. What's this about?" I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Harper sent me a fake pregnancy report, Mom. It says James is the father. Did you know about this?" There was a long pause, then a sigh. "She's been stressed, Abigail. College is hard. Maybe she made a mistake." A mistake. Forging a document to ruin my wedding wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. "Mom, I've been paying for her college, her rent, everything. And she does this." My voice cracked louder than I meant. A couple at the next table glanced over and I lowered my head, embarrassed. Mom's voice softened, but not in the way I wanted. "You've always been so hard on her. Maybe if you'd been around more, she wouldn't act out." The words landed like a punch. Been around more, I'd given up my own dreams to keep our family afloat. Tessa reached across the table, her eyes fierce. "That's not fair, Abigail. You've done more than enough." I nodded, but Mom's words echoed, mixing with Harper's smirk. I thought of our old house, the creaky porch where I used to read to Harper, promising her the world. Now I wondered if she'd ever seen me as anything but a bank account. The tea arrived lukewarm, and I stared into it, feeling the weight of every dollar I'd sent her, every late night I'd worked. I drove home alone, Tessa's offer to stay over lingering in my mind. My apartment was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of lilies I'd bought for the wedding. I sat on my couch, pulling a throw blanket over my knees, and opened my laptop. The bank statements were there, rows of transfers to Harper's account, to Mom's, to the utility company. Each one felt like a piece of me I'd given away. I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest growing sharper. Harper's betrayal wasn't just about James. It was about everything I'd built for her crumbling in a single moment. The next morning I woke up with a headache, my eyes gritty from crying. My apartment felt too small, the lilies on the counter now wilting, their sweet smell turning sour. I couldn't stop thinking about Mom's words last night, blaming me for Harper's stress. I grabbed my phone, hoping for a text from James, something to anchor me. Nothing. Just a notification from my bank, another payment for Harper's car insurance automatically deducted. My stomach churned. I'd been funding her lies, her smirk, her betrayal. I called James again, pacing my living room. He answered, his voice tight. Abigail. I can't do the rehearsal dinner tonight. I need time. Time. We were supposed to be finalizing table settings, laughing over last-minute details. James, please, I said, my throat tight. You know this isn't true. Harper made it up. He sighed, heavy and distant. I want to believe you, but this report, it's messing with my head. He hung up and I stood there, the silence deafening. My fiancé, the man who'd promised me forever, was slipping away because of a lie. I drove to Harper's apartment again, my hands shaking on the wheel. I needed answers, not her vague excuses. The complex was quieter now, early sunlight glinting off the bikes outside. I knocked harder than I meant to. Harper opened the door, wearing a new jacket, leather expensive. My money. Her eyes narrowed. You again? What now, Abigail? Her tone was sharp, like I was the one intruding. I pushed past her, ignoring her protest, and saw that designer bag on her counter tag still attached. My savings had bought that too. Harper, tell me why, I said, my voice low but firm. Why'd you send that report? What did I ever do to you? She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. It was a joke. Okay, you're blowing this out of proportion. A joke. I felt heat rise in my chest, my fists clenching. You sent a fake pregnancy report to my fiancé Harper. That's not a joke. That's my life. She smirked, just like yesterday, and it took everything not to scream. Maybe you should ask James why he's so quick to doubt you, she said, her words dripping with venom. I froze, her words cutting deeper than I expected. Was she right? Was James's hesitation a sign of something real? No, I couldn't let her twist this. I stepped closer, my voice shaking but steady. I've paid for everything you have. Your tuition, your rent, that bag. And you repay me by trying to ruin my wedding. Harper's smirk faded, but only for a moment. She shrugged, picking at her nails. You always play the martyr, Abigail. Maybe I'm tired of it. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Nathan, our older brother. I answered, stepping outside to the hallway, my heart pounding. Abigail, what's going on? He asked, his voice rough. James just called me, freaking out about some report. Did Harper really do this? I swallowed hard, leaning against the wall. Yeah, Nathan, she did. And she doesn't even care. He cursed under his breath. She's been off lately, ever since you stopped coming home as much. But this is too far. His words stung, another reminder of how I'd pulled back from the family, too busy working to keep them afloat. I thought of Mom's kitchen, where I used to help Harper with her homework, her laughter filling the room. Now it was like she'd erased those memories. I told Nathan about her joke excuse, and he groaned. She's been spending like crazy, Abigail. I thought you knew. Knew I'd been too buried in work to notice, but every dollar I sent was fueling her resentment. I hung up, my anger boiling over. Harper wasn't just betraying me. She was using my sacrifices against me. I walked back inside, ready to confront her again, but she was on her phone, laughing at something completely unbothered. The sight of her so careless while my world fell apart made my chest tighten. I wanted to grab that phone, demand she face me, but my phone buzzed again. A text from Mom Harper's, just confused. Don't be so hard on her. I stared at it, my vision blurring with tears, the weight of their dismissal crushing me. I stood in Harper's doorway, my phone still clutched in my hand. Mom's text searing into me. Don't be so hard on her. The words felt like a betrayal, all their own, as if my pain was just collateral damage. Harper glanced up from her phone, her laughter fading into a bored sigh. You're still here, she said, tossing her hair back, the leather jacket gleaming under the apartment's dim lights. I wanted to scream to make her feel the weight of what she'd done, but my voice caught in my throat. I stepped back into the hallway, needing air, my chest tight with a mix of rage and hurt. The walls seemed to close in the hum of Harper's music mocking me. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up late balancing her tuition payments with Mom's mortgage, my own life squeezed into the margins. And now Mom was defending her as if I was the one breaking our family apart. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail from James. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the play button. His voice came through low and strained. Abigail, I can't stop thinking about that report. I need to know it's not true. I can't do this right now. The message cut off, leaving a hollow silence. I replayed it, hoping I'd misheard, but each word was a fresh wound. He wasn't just doubting me. He was pulling away, leaving me to face this alone. I drove to our childhood home, the one I'd helped keep standing with every paycheck. The familiar creak of the front door greeted me as I stepped inside, the smell of Mom's lavender candles filling the air. She was in the living room folding laundry, her face tight when she saw me. Abigail, you shouldn't have come, she said, not looking up. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Her words hit like a slap, and I stood frozen, the room spinning. Harder for who? Mom, I asked, my voice shaking. I'm the one losing everything. Harper lied about James, and you're acting like it's my fault. She set down a towel, her lips pressed thin. Harper's young. She's struggling. You've always been the strong one, Abigail. You should understand. Strong. That word again, like a chain I'd been dragging since I was 15 when Dad walked out, and I became the one to hold us together. I sank onto the couch, the worn fabric scratching against my jeans. I've paid for her college, Mom. Her car, her clothes, this house. And she does this? Mom's eyes flicked to me, then away. You've been so focused on your job, your wedding. Maybe she felt left behind. Left behind, I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a choke. I'd given up my own dreams, my savings, my time to make sure Harper had everything. The doorbell rang, and Mom went to answer it. I heard Nathan's voice, low and urgent. He stepped into the room, his work boots leaving faint dirt marks on the rug. Abigail, I talked to James's brother, he said, his voice low. James isn't coming. He left a note at the hotel saying he can't marry you until he knows the truth. A note, not even a call. My knees buckled and I grabbed the barn's wooden wall to steady myself. The rough grain bit into my palm, grounding me in this nightmare. My fiancé, the man I'd built a future with, was gone, and my family was watching me break. Lila's voice cut through the air again, louder now from inside the barn. I heard Harper's been living it up, all on Abigail's dime. No wonder she's acting out. The words echoed, each one a fresh wound. Guests were openly staring now, their whispers a low hum that made my skin crawl. I wanted to run, to tear off this dress and disappear, but my feet were rooted to the ground. Mom stepped closer, her voice softer but no less cutting. You should have been there for her, Abigail. Maybe this wouldn't have happened. I looked at her, my mother, the woman who'd leaned on me since I was a teenager, who'd never once asked how I managed to keep our family afloat. I was there, I said, my voice raw. I paid for everything. Her school, this house, your bills. And this is what I get. Mom's face hardened, but she didn't answer. Harper finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine for a split second, before she turned away, her silence louder than any words. Tessa touched my shoulder, her voice a whisper. Abigail, you don't deserve this. But I barely heard her. The weight of it all, Harper's calculated betrayal, James's absence, Mom's blame, the guests' stares, crashed over me like a wave. I stood there in my perfect white dress, surrounded by peonies and fairy lights, and felt utterly alone. My heart was a raw, open wound, and I didn't know how to stop the bleeding. The barn's fairy lights blurred in my vision as I stood frozen, the weight of Mom's blame and Harper's indifference crushing me. Tessa's hand on my shoulder was the only thing keeping me upright. I wanted to scream, to run, but something shifted inside me, a spark of clarity through the fog of pain. I'd spent years carrying them, Harper, Mom, our fractured family, and I was done. I wasn't going to let Harper's lie define me anymore. I straightened my dress, heavy but my resolve heavier. I walked back inside, ignoring the guests' stares, and found my purse by the guest book. My hands shook as I pulled out my car keys, the metal cold against my palm. Tessa followed, her eyes wide. Abigail, where are you going? She asked, her voice soft but urgent. I need to do something, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not letting her win. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I knew I couldn't keep bleeding for them. I drove to my apartment, the city lights streaking past like tears I refused to shed. My living room was a mess of wedding plans, seating charts, vendor receipts, all mocking me. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my bank account. The numbers stared back transfers to Harper's tuition, Mom's utilities, her car payments. Every month I'd sent money telling myself it was my duty. Now it felt like chains. I clicked into the recurring payments and hovered over the cancel button. My heart raced, but I pressed it one by one, stopping the flow of my life into theirs. My phone buzzed. Reese, my coworker, checking in after I'd missed work yesterday. I called her back, my voice raw but firm. "Reese, I need advice," I said, pacing. "I've been paying for my sister's entire life, and she just tried to ruin mine. I stopped the payments. Is that okay?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Abigail, you've been more than generous. It's time to put yourself first. If you need to talk this through, I'm here." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me towards something I hadn't felt in years, my own strength. I needed to face Harper, not in anger, but with truth. I drove to her apartment, the streets quiet in the early afternoon. My dress was gone, replaced with jeans and a sweater, but I still felt exposed, like my pain was written on my skin. I knocked and Harper opened the door, her face annoyed. "What now, Abigail?" she said, blocking the doorway. I held up a folder thick with bank statements I'd printed at home, every transaction marked in black ink. "This is what I've done for you," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "Every dollar. And I'm done." Harper's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me, her annoyance shifting to something uneasy. "You're bluffing," she said, laughing, but it was thin, nervous. "You can't just cut me off." I stepped closer, holding her gaze. "I already did. No more tuition, no more rent, no more anything." Her face paled, but she crossed her arms, defiant. "You'll regret this. Mom will freak." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words but refusing to bend. "Maybe, but I'm not your bank anymore." I turned to leave, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a strange new power. I'd spent so long being the strong one, the fixer, but now I was choosing me. As I reached my car, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. "You're abandoning us." "How could you?" My chest tightened, but I didn't reply. I slid into the driver's seat, the folder still in my hand, and felt something stir, a fire I'd forgotten I had burning brighter with every second. I drove away from Harper's apartment, the folder of bank statements heavy on the passenger seat. The city was waking up, coffee shops spilling warm light onto the sidewalks, but inside me something was shifting. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Harper needed or what Mom expected. I was thinking about me. My hands steadied on the wheel, the fire in my chest growing not wild, but focused like a candle flame finding its wick. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun cutting through the blinds in sharp slants. I opened my laptop again, not to check payments, but to email my boss. I'd been hiding my family's weight at work, always smiling, always professional. No more. I typed a request for a week off, my fingers moving with purpose. I needed space to breathe, to figure out who I was without their demands. When I hit send, a weight lifted, small but real. My phone buzzed again, Mom calling this time. I let it ring, watching the screen until it went dark. Her text from earlier still stung, accusing me of abandoning them, but I wasn't running. I was choosing. I walked to my bedroom, where a box of wedding decorations sat untouched in the corner. I pulled out a small glass frame meant for our vows and ran my thumb over its smooth edge. I'd imagined James and me filling it with promises. Now it was just glass, empty but still whole. Reese texted, asking to meet at a coffee shop downtown, the one with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. I agreed, needing her steady voice. When I arrived, she was already there, stirring sugar into her latte, her glasses fogging slightly from the steam. "You look different," she said, studying me. "Not bad different. Stronger." I managed a small smile, sliding into the seat across from her. "I stopped paying for Harper," I said, the words feeling new in my mouth. "Everything. Her school, her rent, all of it." Reese leaned forward, her eyes bright. "That took guts, Abigail." How do you feel? I pause, sipping my coffee. Its bitterness grounding me. Like I'm betraying them, but also like I'm finally free. She nodded, no judgment, just listening. You've been carrying too much for too long. What's next? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I couldn't go back to being their safety net. I need to talk to James, I said. Not to fix things, but to understand. I left the coffee shop and drove to a park near my apartment, a quiet place with a bench under an oak tree. I sat there, the folder of statements in my lap, and started writing a letter to Harper, not to send but to release. I wrote about the nights I'd stayed up calculating how to cover her bills, the dreams I'd shelved to keep her in school. I wrote about the pain of her betrayal, how her lie had fractured my trust in James, in Mom, and myself. The words poured out raw and unfiltered until my pen slowed, my hand cramped but lighter. When I looked up, the park was golden with late afternoon light, kids laughing on a distant playground. My phone buzzed. Harper this time, a voicemail. Abigail, you can't do this, she said, her voice high, panicked. I need that money. You're ruining my life. I listened, waiting for an apology, but none came. I deleted the message, my fingers steady on the screen. I wasn't ruining her life. I was reclaiming mine. I stood, tucking the folder under my arm, and walked back to my car. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of cut grass. I didn't need Harper's remorse or Mom's approval. I didn't even need James to come back. What I needed was to stand in my own truth, to stop being the one who always gave until there was nothing left. I slid into the driver's seat, my eyes fixed on the horizon, and let the silence settle around me, heavy with possibility. The days after I cut off Harper's payments felt like walking on thin ice, waiting for it to crack. I sat in my apartment, the quiet louder than ever, the folder of bank statements still on my kitchen table. I hadn't heard from Harper since her panicked voicemail, but the silence wasn't peace. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. My phone stayed dark, no calls from Mom, no texts from James. I'd made my move, and now the world was holding its breath, watching me. I checked my bank account, the balance higher than it had been in years, without Harper's expenses draining it. It should have felt like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like I'd severed a limb, one I'd been carrying for too long. I thought of the coffee shop confrontation, Harper's nervous laugh when I told her I was done. She didn't believe me then, but the reality was sinking in now. A week later, I got a call from Nathan. His voice was tired, strained. Abigail Harper dropped out of college. He said, no preamble. She couldn't pay the tuition. She's back at Mom's, sleeping in her old room. I leaned against my counter, the cold granite biting into my palms. I'd expected her to struggle, but hearing it was different. I saw her at 18, clutching her acceptance letter, her eyes bright with dreams I'd funded. Now those dreams were on hold, and I was the one who'd pulled the plug. Does she blame me? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant. Nathan sighed. She's not talking much. Just angry. Mom's a mess, says they can't cover the bills without you. I closed my eyes, picturing Mom's kitchen, the unpaid utility notices piling up on the counter. I'd always been the one to clear those stacks to keep the lights on. Now they were scrambling, and a part of me ached with guilt, even as another part stood firm. I went to work trying to focus on spreadsheets, but my mind kept drifting. Reese noticed, pulling me aside during lunch. We sat in the break room, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence. You okay? She asked, unwrapping a sandwich. I shook my head, stirring my coffee. Harper dropped out. Mom's struggling. I did this, Reese. She set her sandwich down, her eyes steady. You didn't do this. Harper did. She made choices, Abigail. You're allowed to make yours. Her words were a balm, but they didn't erase the knot in my chest. I drove home, passing a bookstore where Harper and I used to browse, her dragging me to the art section while I calculated how to afford her next semester. The memory stung, but I didn't turn back. At home, I found a package at my door, small and plain. Inside was a note from James, his handwriting shaky. I found the email Harper sent. It's fake. I'm sorry, Abigail. Can we talk? My heart skipped, but not with hope. Something heavier, like dread mixed with relief. I set the note down, my fingers tracing the paper. James was reaching out, but it didn't undo the days of silence, the note he'd left at the hotel, the wedding that never happened. I wanted to call him to hear his voice, but I couldn't yet. I wasn't ready to forgive, not when I was still learning to stand up for myself. That night I scrolled through my social media, something I'd avoided since the wedding. A post from Harper popped up, a blurry photo of her at a bar, her smile forced. The caption read, "Some people only care about themselves." My breath caught. She meant me. Friends we'd shared since high school had liked it, their names a quiet betrayal. I stared at the screen, my chest tight, the weight of her words settling like stones. I'd stopped her money, her lifeline, and now she was painting me as the villain while I sat alone, my life still in pieces. I sat in my dim living room. James's note on the coffee table, its edges curling slightly from the humid air. The words, "I'm sorry," blurred as I stared, my coffee gone cold. Harper's social media post kept replaying in my mind, her accusation twisting the knife deeper. She'd turned our shared friends against me, and their likes felt like silent judgments, each one chipping away at the life I'd built. I closed my laptop, the screen's glow fading, leaving me in shadows. The next day, I walked to the corner store needing air. The clerk, an older woman named Ruth, nodded as I grabbed milk, her usual small talk absent. I wondered if she'd heard whispers, if even this tiny piece of my world was tainted. Back home, I found a voicemail from Mom, her voice clipped. "Abigail, the power company called. We're late on the bill. You need to fix this." I deleted it, my finger steady, but my heart sank. Fix this. Like I hadn't spent years doing just that. I met Tessa at a small diner, its neon sign flickering outside. She slid into the booth, her eyes searching mine. "You look exhausted," she said, pushing a plate of pancakes my way. I shrugged, poking at the food. "Harper's telling everyone I'm selfish. Mom's acting like I've abandoned them." Tessa's jaw tightened. "You gave them everything, Abigail. They don't get to rewrite that." I nodded, but the guilt lingered, a quiet ache I couldn't shake. Nathan called later, his voice heavy with frustration. "I went to Mom's," he said. "Harper's a wreck, sleeping all day, barely talking. I found a pawn shop receipt in her room. She sold that necklace you gave her, the one from Grandma." My breath caught. That necklace, silver with a tiny sapphire, was the last gift I'd given her before college, a piece of our family's history. I'd saved for months to buy it back after Mom pawned it years ago. Now Harper had sold it again to fund her careless life. I walked to my window, the city lights smudging into a haze. The necklace was gone, like so much else I'd given her. I thought of the hours I'd spent tutoring her, the weekends I'd skipped to cover her rent. Each sacrifice had been a thread weaving us together, and she'd cut them all without a glance. My phone lit up, a text from a mutual friend. Sarah saw Harper's post. "You okay?" I didn't reply. How could I explain this kind of loss? James called that evening, his voice soft, hesitant. "Abigail," I tracked down the email. "Harper used a fake account, doctored the report with some app. I should have trusted you." I listened, my fingers tight around the phone. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, and the silence was its own kind of wound. "I don't know," he finally said. I was scared. I hung up, not angry, just empty. His apology was real, but it couldn't erase the days I'd stood alone. I sat on my couch, the room dark except for a single lamp. The weight of their reactions, Harper's defiance, Mom's demands, James's doubt pressed down heavy as stone. I'd stopped the payments, drawn my line, but it hadn't brought peace. It had left me here in this quiet apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of everything I'd given. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the stillness swallow me, my heart, a hollow echo of the life I'd once held together. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, soft and golden painting stripes across my journal. I sat cross-legged on my bed, pen in hand, writing not about Harper or James, but about me, what I wanted, what I'd lost sight of. The apartment was quiet. No buzzing phone, no urgent emails. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to fix someone else's life. I traced the journal's worn edges, each page a step away from the weight I'd carried. I'd started walking to a nearby park every evening, a small one with a pond where ducks glided in lazy circles. The ritual grounded me, the crunch of gravel under my sneakers a steady rhythm. I'd sit on a bench watching the water ripple and let my thoughts unfold. I wrote about the girl I'd been at 20, working late to pay mom's bills, dreaming of a life I'd never chased. That girl felt far away now, but I was starting to find her again. Reese had invited me to a work retreat, a weekend in the mountains with colleagues I'd kept at arm's length. I almost said no, but something nudged me to go. The drive up was long, the road winding through pine forests, the air sharp with sap. At the cabin, I sat by a fire pit with Reese and a few others, their laughter easy, unguarded. When they asked about my life, I didn't hide. I told them about Harper's betrayal, the canceled wedding, the years of giving. Their faces softened, no judgment, just listening. One colleague, Maya, shared her own story of cutting ties with a toxic sibling. "It's hard, but it's freedom," she said, her voice steady. I nodded, feeling seen. Back home, I found a letter slipped under my door. The paper creased my name in careful script. It was from Grandma's estate, a note she'd written before she passed, forgotten until now. I sat on my couch unfolding it, her familiar cursive like a hug. "Abigail, you're stronger than you know," she wrote. "Live for you, not them." I held the letter to my chest, tears pricking my eyes, not from pain but from recognition. She'd seen me even when I couldn't see myself. I started meeting James for coffee, small steps toward understanding. We sat in a corner cafe, the clink of mugs around us, the air thick with cinnamon. He looked tired, his hands fidgeting with a napkin. "I messed up, Abigail," he said, his eyes meeting mine. I let that report shake me. I should have fought for us. I listened, stirring my latte, feeling the ache of his absence, but also a new calm. I wasn't desperate to fix us anymore. I was learning to fix me. At the park one evening, I sat longer than usual, the sky turning pink. A duck waddled near, its feathers ruffled by the breeze. I thought of Grandma's letter, her words a quiet anchor. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood in that barn, broken by Harper's lie. I was still hurting, but I was also growing, each step lighter than the last. I closed my journal, the pen resting in its spine, and let the stillness wrap around me, soft as the fading light. I started therapy a week after the retreat, sitting in a small office with a therapist named Clara, her voice calm like a steady stream. I told her about Dad leaving when I was 12, how I'd stepped into his shoes, paying bills, keeping Harper safe. She listened, her pen pausing as I described the wedding, the lie, the silence that followed. "You've been carrying their weight," she said, her eyes kind. "What happens if you let it go?" I didn't answer, but the question followed me home. I walked to the park again, the pond reflecting a cloudy sky. A kid tossed breadcrumbs to the ducks, their quacks soft in the evening air. I sat on my usual bench, pulling my scarf tighter. I thought about Dad, his old leather jacket, the way he'd promised to come back but never did. I'd spent years trying to fill that gap for Harper, for Mom. Therapy was teaching me it wasn't my job. James and I met again, this time at a bakery, with warm scones and chipped teacups. He talked about his fear, how Harper's report had twisted his trust. "I see you now, Abigail," he said, his voice low. "I see what you've carried." I nodded, sipping my tea, its warmth seeping into my hands. I didn't need his promises anymore. I needed my own. We parted with a quiet agreement to keep talking, no pressure, just time. At home, I found Harper's voicemail from last week, one I hadn't deleted. Her voice was sharp, accusing me of ruining her life. I played it again, but it didn't cut like before. I saw her now not as my little sister needing rescue, but as someone making her own choices. I deleted the message, my finger lingering on the screen, a small act of release. The apartment felt lighter, the air less heavy with their expectations. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. My easel sat by the window, a canvas half covered in blues and grays. Each brushstroke was mine, not for Harper, not for Mom, just me. I painted the park's pond, the ducks, the way the light hit the water. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Reese came over one night admiring the canvas. "You're finding yourself," she said, smiling. I nodded, feeling the truth of it. One evening I walked to the mailbox, a chilly breeze tugging at my coat. A letter from Nathan waited, his handwriting messy, but familiar. He'd started helping Mom with bills, taking on what I'd carried alone. "You don't have to do it all," he wrote. I stood there, the letter in my hands, the street quiet except for a distant dog barking. I didn't feel triumph, just relief, like a knot loosening inside me. I returned to the park, the bench cold under me. The pond was still, the ducks gone for the night. I closed my eyes, letting Grandma's words echo, "Live for you." I wasn't there yet, but I was closer. The pain of Harper's betrayal, James's doubt, Mom's blame, they were still there, but softer, like stones smoothed by a river. I breathed in the crisp air, my heart steady, and sat in the quiet, ready for whatever came next. I moved into a new apartment a month later, a small place with high windows and a view of a quiet street lined with maples. The walls were bare, but I liked it that way, clean mine. I unpacked slowly, setting out a few books, a candle, a mug I'd bought on a whim. Each choice felt deliberate, like I was building something new, not just a home, but a life that belonged to me. The silence here was soft, not heavy, a space where I could hear my own thoughts. James and I started over, not as fiancés, but as two people learning each other again. We took a weekend trip to a cabin by a lake, the kind with creaky floors and a wood stove. We walked along the shore, skipping stones, talking about small things, his students, my painting, the way the water caught the light. "I'm different now," I told him one evening, the fire crackling behind us. He nodded, his hand brushing mine. "I see it, Abigail. I'm trying to be different too." It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was enough for now. Harper sent a letter, her handwriting shaky, no return address. She was working at a cafe, saving for community college, trying to stand on her own. "I'm sorry," she wrote, the words plain but heavy. "I didn't see you before." I read it at my kitchen counter, the morning light spilling over the page. I didn't write back, not yet. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip, but I felt the anger softening like ice melting in spring. Her words were a start, and that was something. I kept painting my canvases, filling with colors I hadn't touched in years, ochre, teal, soft pinks. I hung one in my living room, a swirl of sky and earth, no ducks or ponds, just feeling. Tessa came over, bringing wine and a laugh that filled the room. "This place is you," she said, looking at the painting. I smiled, pouring her a glass. "I'm getting there," I said, and meant it. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Mom called one afternoon, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard. "Nathan's helping with the bills," she said. "I didn't realize how much you were doing, Abigail." I stood by my window, watching a neighbor water her flowers. "I needed to stop," I said simply. She didn't argue, just sighed, and we talked about small things, her garden, my job. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a step, a crack in the wall we'd built. I started running in the mornings, my sneakers pounding the pavement, the rhythm steadying my heart. The street was lined with old houses, their porches sagging but warm with life. I'd pass a woman walking her dog, a man sweeping leaves, and I'd nod, feeling part of something without needing to carry it. Each run was a reminder I could move forward one step at a time without looking back. I came home one morning, my breath visible in the cool air, and stood in my doorway, the world still for a moment, my heart full of quiet hope. One Sunday I took a drive out of the city, the road stretching through fields dusted with frost. I ended up at a small orchard, the kind where families pick apples and sip cider. I wandered alone, my boots sinking into the soft earth, a basket swinging in my hand. The air smelled of ripe fruit and wood smoke, and for the first time in months, I felt unburdened, like I could breathe without carrying someone else's weight. I picked an apple, its skin cool and smooth, and bit into it, the tartness sharp on my tongue. It was a small moment, but it was mine. I started volunteering at a local shelter, sorting donations, folding blankets, listening to stories from people who'd lost more than I could imagine. One woman, Diane, told me about leaving her old life behind, starting fresh with nothing but a suitcase. You don't need to fix everything, she said, her hands busy with a stack of towels. You just need to keep going. Her words stayed with me, a quiet truth I was learning to live. Nathan invited me to dinner at his place, a small house with a cluttered porch and warm lights. We sat at his table eating pasta. The conversation easy for the first time in years. He talked about helping Mom, about Harper's new job, about his own regrets for staying silent too long. You carried us all. Abigail, he said, his fork pausing. I'm sorry I let you. I looked at him. My brother, his face lined with care, and felt a knot loosen. We're figuring it out, I said, and we clinked glasses, the sound soft in the cozy room. I kept running my mornings now, a ritual of motion and quiet. One day I stopped at a bridge near my street, the river below moving slow and steady. I leaned on the railing, watching the water catch the dawn's light, and thought about love, not the kind I'd given Harper or Mom, but the kind I owed myself. I'd spent so long believing love meant sacrifice, that my worth was tied to what I could give. Now I saw it differently. Love was setting boundaries, choosing myself without guilt, trusting that I was enough. I donated my wedding dress to a charity shop, folding it carefully into a box, its lace soft under my fingers. The woman at the counter smiled, thanking me, and I walked out lighter, the weight of that day finally gone. I wasn't erasing the pain, but I was letting it rest. Harper's letter sat unanswered on my desk, but I read it again, sometimes her apology a seed that might grow in time. For now, I was learning to live without needing her to make it right. The lesson wasn't loud or grand. It was quiet, woven into the mornings I ran the paintings, I finished the conversations with James that grew softer, truer. I learned that love doesn't mean giving until you're empty. It means holding space for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I was still healing, still growing, but I was no longer the woman who carried everyone else's world. I was Abigail, and that was enough. What's the hardest boundary you've ever had to set to protect your own heart? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and I'd love to hear yours. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, for being here with me. Here's to healing, to finding our way, one quiet step at a time.